Hi, Sabina, Yvonne. Good to see you again. Thanks for being here again for second installment.
Yeah, hello. Welcome back.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I find like it's helpful to, instead of just having like a one person lecture where it's just people just hear my perspective, I think it's more interesting to have a conversation, but also to hear from different people with very different experiences. And we found that out last time where we were talking about, just our own experiences of the emptiness thread and how different really they can be from person to person. So it's super helpful to have you guys here. So thanks for your time. So today we're going to dive into the oneness thread. Um, and maybe we'll kind of treat it the same way that we did in the last um, episode where we went through kind of the opening, the deepening, the braiding, the integrating, the releasing, but also some of the pitfalls and practices and experiences that people can have, kind of give sort of a full picture of this thread. Of course, there's tons to say. We could talk all day, all week about this thread, but give people kind of the lay of the land, the overview of this territory. We talked about last time sort of like what an awakening is. So I don't think we need to necessarily repeat that. People can refer back to the emptiness thread talk. At the beginning of that, we sort of defined what awakening is. So here with the oneness thread, we are talking about the same cluster of shifts in perception, shifts in identity, and shifts in worldview, or what reality seems to be, that will happen at some point on this trajectory. But we have quite different experiences, quite different perceptions, quite different identities, quite different worldviews or understandings of reality that come up on the oneness thread. Kind of the basic idea is the same, but the details are all different when it comes to this thread. I guess I wanted to start just like I did the last time, pointing out some traditions that emphasize these kinds of shifts. So here with the emptiness thread, we talked about, I mentioned some schools of Buddhism really emphasize emptiness. A lot of schools of Buddhism emphasize emptiness and arriving at those kinds of perceptions through meditation. So the schools that like Theravada Buddhism and Zen Buddhism that are very meditation focused are kind of almost exclusively oriented towards emptiness. But other forms of Buddhism, like Mahayana Buddhism, that talk a lot about kind of integrating wisdom with compassion. A lot of times when they talk about compassion, they are maybe speaking in a more oneness thread kind of language. But it's not only Buddhism, it's also many forms of Hinduism that talk about kind of consciousness or God or some kind of like ground of being as being the one or the absolute. All of that language is pointing towards oneness thread. You have Christian mysticism, Western tradition more generally, that looks for kind of union with God, unity experiences. I would classify those as oneness thread as well. So it's really any kind of tradition that's pointing towards all of reality. Instead of all of reality dropping away, which is what we talked about with emptiness, it's all of reality is unified into one kind of totality, or one kind of absolute, or one kind of indivisible, non-separatable thing, right? We might say the universe or the cosmos, and using more secular language. What you call it doesn't really matter. The thing that I want to point towards is kind of the experiences of this unifying sort of direction or trajectory. So instead of the emptiness trajectory of peeling more and more layers away, or seeing through more and more, or neti, not this, not this, not this, the oneness thread direction is inclusion, more and more inclusion. I am that, and I'm also that, and I'm also that, and continuing to expand um, until every last experience, every last thing in the cosmos has been included into the one. Okay, so that's kind of like the, I guess, theoretical, philosophical kind of orientation. But what we're talking about here is like experiences, right? Like what it's like to actually kind of experience this thread. And so I guess I'll say from my kind of personal experience, but also just from talking with other people, I've noticed that often this thread begins with an experience that is more emotional or more kind of like uh, stronger kind of heart centered kind of experience of feelings of connection, feelings of compassion, feelings of interconnectivity or intimacy. Could be with nature, with all beings. It could be something like that. So for me, that was actually my first big. Um, I mean, I had a lot of, I would say, like religious and spiritual experiences when I was a kid, when I was a teenager. I started doing formal meditation practice within a Theravada Buddhist kind of lineage, and I think we talked about this last time. I didn't really get anywhere with it. But I shifted into doing a metta bhavana practice, which is like a loving kindness practice, and had this big kind of like expansive feeling of connection with all beings and kind of universal compassion. And that sort of deeply transformed my life in my 20s, in my early 20s. And I would say that was my first kind of proper awakening experience. And it was really about, kind of an interconnected web of life, and may all of this life be happy and well, and seeing that kind of connection and intimacy with all beings. So that was my first experience with this thread, and then it was like a long period of like 20 years of just sort of like slow kind of settling into that, and kind of allowing that sensibility to really take root and kind of really transform my whole life, and everything that I did after that in terms of my job, in terms of parenting, in terms of like everything was really shaped by that experience in my 20s. What about you guys? What was your first kind of opening to the oneness type experience?
I can start sharing. Again, like with the emptiness thread, when I shared that, I feel like there is already something when I was very young. That's the same with the oneness thread. I remember since very early age, I was very sensitive to my environment. I mean, you could say that very empathetic, very sensitive. So there was not just this borders here in the system. It was just already very open and fluid in a way into the environment, into other beings and stuff. Music was a huge trigger for me. When I heard music, I just felt like I'm melting. I lost myself in music. It was triggering a lot of this opening. And the first time when I had a shift that was, again, like with emptiness, immediately shut down by my trauma, was when I was in a group where we were chanting, "The river is flowing into the sea," which is just a perfect mantra for oneness, right? You, the little drop of water, you're flowing into the huge sea and you merge with the sea. And we were singing this song, and I had a complete opening. And immediately after, a complete shutdown, because again, my system couldn't hold the energy of oneness. It was too much. It was like when you put your finger into electricity, it's just like it broke down. But that was the first real opening. And I had this little openings whenever I had like something triggered by music, especially, I guess. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Mine is a little bit closer to what Pierce shared. But also as a small child, I remember that I had moments where I was just melting into the totality of whatever. Then, of course, that was gone when I was growing up. And I had an energy treatment in my late 20s where someone was laying hands on. And suddenly I was looking at my heart space, and it was covered with like thick Arctic ice, and I could hear how it was breaking. And then there was this huge golden sun that was just emanating from there and into the body, and that was just awesome. But the interesting thing was when I came outside and I stepped on the streets, everything was this golden sun, and it was pure love, It was like dripping from the clouds, and there was a peak experience, I would say, but which lasted for maybe an hour or so. And then it shifted my whole life. It put it on a new trajectory. So the heart became my path, you could say. And I would see from the heart, feel from the heart, speak from the heart, and just the heart became the compass or the source of wisdom, and it infiltrated and informed all my being in the world from then on, I would say.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like mine too. Yours may be more visual than mine. I had some of those visuals later, but yeah, but this is interesting already that we're pointing to kind of how different people can react differently to these sorts of experiences. For some people, it might like draw you in. For me, it was a sort of a slow settling in and a kind of like habituating to this new normal. And then Yvonne, you have more of the recoiling from it, the shutting down from it, that a lot of people experience too. So, yeah, I just want to really kind of continuously underscore how different people's experiences of these threads really are. So that's just really an important, I think, feature, of Multidharma, is just to kind of acknowledge that and really prioritize those individual differences. So sooner or later, it sounds like, maybe sooner in your case, Sabina, more little coming online a little more gradually in my case, maybe, but, sooner or later on this thread, there's the experience of kind of the, it's not just an emotional connection, like I'm here feeling compassion for all beings. That interconnectivity or intimacy or emotionality can be an important initial experience, but sooner or later there is this kind of experience of the boundaries of the self, or the structure of the self, or what you took to be the self, kind of dissolving into this larger field, or this larger field of love, or this larger container of God, or dissolving into the cosmos or the universe or the goddess, or however people are going to language it, and whatever they're going to experience might differ, but just a dissolution of the self, or an expansion of the self to include more and more things. And sometimes I've heard some weird stories where people have kind of along the way, right? I mean, ultimately you're going to expand out into including all things, but along the way, kind of the way that the self kind of becomes destabilized is kind of interesting sometimes. Like I've heard stories of people that were like, I felt I was here, and then I felt I was the tree looking at me, or like there's kind of like weird glitches with this, where is the identity being placed, that are, again, very individual. But I think that what's important is that the trajectory of this thread moves towards, more and more and more being encompassed into this, self, or this I am, this bigger and bigger and bigger whole, or wholeness. Do you guys want to add anything there to sort of say something different with different words than what I just said?
Well, I would say that for me, it was more, like you shared, a gradual process that spanned over, I'd say, 15 years. And from being more localized and here as something coming from here, or being experienced here, there was, when I was training to become a healer, it was also a heart-based focus, and it was extending that compassion and that heart space to others. And then, for example, like taking in the pain or the darkness or the suffering from the other, maybe a bit like Tonglen, similar, but it didn't have a name, taking it into this vast, loving space, and then just experiencing this to be also love. So that was quite a challenge because it was letting go of boundaries and resistances. And from then it became more of a devotional path, like a devotion to the divine or to the sacred. I would give over my life, my body to the Holy Spirit for 15 years every night. So it was a gradual process of giving it over to something bigger. And a big part in this was also like Mother Mary, because I never felt I had a very open-hearted mother. And so there was this being cared for, being held by something bigger, being wanted, loved. And that was very nurturing, and it gradually dissolved the boundaries, but it was a very soft process this way.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful. So we've already identified a couple of different practices that help with opening, but also with deepening this thread, right? So I talked about metta, which is kind of like just spreading loving kindness or trying to generate, positive feelings of love or compassion, and then sort of try to emanate those out. You mentioned Tonglen, so that's like, bringing in the suffering and kind of transforming it into love. You mentioned, it's devotional practices, which many people find to be quite effective in this thread. And then just like dissolving or sinking into the love, or sinking into the feeling of being held, or the sinking into this feeling of sacredness. These are all, great practices for people to try to play around with and see, you have to steepen them a little bit in order to get the effects, but to try these out. I do want to mention that on multidharma.net, I have, and on the YouTube channel, I have a series of very brief 5-minute tutorials that introduce a lot of different types of practices that I think there's like 20 or so practices that are sort of like the core kind of skills, I think, that I would say are important for the 4 threads. So actually a number of these that we are talking about right now are introduced there. So if people don't know what Tonglen is, for example, or metta or something like that, there are some brief kind of intro videos there. What about you, Yvonne? You always have like a little bit of a more rocky road than Sabina.
It's completely completely different to what you two shared.
Yeah, that's why I'm so glad you're here. Please tell us a little bit about what was your experience like?
So all the techniques you just mentioned, the practices you can do, I never did them, and I got in touch with them because I heard about them. But for me, the heart was so wounded that I wasn't able to open it. Like there was no way of feeling compassion for myself, or even for others, or for the pain of the world, because the heart was so vulnerable. And to me, again, like with the emptiness thread, I shared it there too, is that my path was to work through the trauma, to work through all the layers that covered the heart. And the moment I was dealing with like trauma and all these wounds, and they were uncovered and the heart was free again, it was naturally in the open state of interconnectedness, of compassion. So it was not so much that I had to, practice compassion, practice love, and practice these kind of things. They were there, just buried by all the shit that happened in my life. And as soon as the shit was gone, it just flew naturally out of the heart without me doing much.
You're just like a psyche threader all the way, right? Like, I mean, it really seems like the other threads are pretty open for you from your childhood, from early on, but there's just massive kind of psyche thread process that
Yes,
that
that's
was
true.
the major part of your process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe something I want to add is also like, because we mentioned this about boundaries and borders that dissolve when you are on the thread, is again with the emptiness, we said you need a self first before you can deconstruct the self. With the oneness thread is you need clear, safe, and healthy boundaries before you can dissolve them or merge into some greater stuff.
I think that's so well said and so important. Of a note to make about the oneness thread. So for me, I would say, one of the biggest pitfalls with the oneness thread is, yeah, people whose, um, for whatever reason, it could be because of trauma, it could be because of just, religion or belief systems or what have you. Um, they would hear what we are talking about and go in the direction of kind of like surrendering their autonomy or their own sovereignty or their own kind of like boundaries to a guru or to a religion or to some kind of group, and kind of and think that what they're doing there is oneness thread style practices, which I really want to kind of like underscore. And maybe there's a whole other presentation we can do on just, warnings and caveats, right? But this would be like a major one. With the emptiness thread, there's a real danger, like we talked about, of dissociating and just checking out and spiritually bypassing. And here there's a real danger of just kind of, surrendering your autonomy to somebody else or some other group or sect or cult or something, and you really wind up in a very problematic situation because you're right. You have to have this strength. Your strong individual self with clear boundaries and with coming from a position of power and integrity in order to participate then in the deconstruction of the self, right? So yeah, I think that's really well said. So I feel like we're kind of addressing some of the major, pitfalls or footnotes on these practices, right? Beware of these kinds of things. I don't know, Yvonne, were there anything else in that category, challenges and potential detours on this path that you wanted to mention before we move on?
No, I mean, it didn't happen to me, but I was always allergic to people with toxic positivity, like
Mhm.
the light and love movement that never landed here. So I was immune against it somehow, but you already mentioned it. It can happen that you just, lose yourself because it feels home, it feels good, it feels like, finally I'm in a good place. But it might be that you then, overlook the the hierarchical structures that might run behind the scenes. So it's always, if there's too much positivity, if there's too much help, might be a good sign to look a bit closer.
Yeah, it's just another form of spiritual bypass, right? In
Yeah.
the emptiness thread, you can bypass towards dissociation and not caring, and everything's an illusion, so I don't have to think about it, right? And in this thread, you can bypass by like, oh, everything's perfect, or isn't it all just the way it's supposed to be? And like, uh, bad behavior and unethical behavior that's also part of the cosmos, or also part of God, or I don't know, something like that. You can tell yourself all kinds of stories. Okay, so um, let's move back to talking about the deepening, the experiences. Let's assume things are going you know going forward, moving forward well, on this thread. We talked about kind of moving towards the boundaries of the self more and more dissolved, more and more being included within a wholeness that some people will call self with a capital S, some people call God, some people call, the universe, life. I've heard all kinds of terms that people use, religious and otherwise. Um, I want to mention what I think is a point of confusion with that before we move on to the the deeper end of the thread, and And that's what's going on within um, the kind of Western circles of spirituality that call themselves non-duality or that call themselves Advaita. Sometimes there's something I think that happens, that's going on that is maybe a little bit of point of confusion that I wanted to just mention. So, um, I think classically, Advaita Vedanta is a form probably of emptiness, practice, right? It's a form of neti neti. It's a form of kind of seeing through, constructs and concepts and so forth. But the way that I think it's often practiced and talked about in Western spirituality circles is actually as a oneness practice. So I wanna like kind of differentiate that. So if you have this experience where you have like an awakening experience and you're like, oh, I used to think I was just Pierce, I was this individual kind of, um, egoic, like narrative self, but now I see that that's an illusion. Um, and there is really just, perception and there's just really, um, you know, well, experience, or there's really just kind of, awareness, or there's really just kind of, whatever words you're using. If you're really emphasizing having seen through that self, so far that's an emptiness thread kind of experience. If you want to continue on the emptiness thread, you would then turn towards whatever's left after this concept of Pierce falls away. Whatever's left, you turn towards that with the guiding question, well, what seems real and is it really so? And so you could then look at like, oh, perception or a feeling of presence or a feeling of awareness or something else. Is that real? That seems real. Is it really so? Let me go investigate it. And then that will collapse and fall away. And then the next thing will collapse and fall away. There you're doing an emptiness thread practice. But if what happens is, the Pierce falls away and you're like, oh, I used to think I was Pierce, but now I am awareness, right? And awareness is the thing that exists and everything else is part of awareness or arising in awareness. And let me identify with awareness and create this kind of like field of awareness that is the one thing that exists and everything else is arising within it. You turn that into a oneness practice, right? Into a oneness thread. I'm not saying either one of those is right or wrong, but I just want to clarify that you can take the same words and the same practices, right? And wind up on one of these two threads. And you might be both people might be using the word non-duality, and then they're very confused because they're talking about different things, right? So, I don't know if you guys want to comment on that at all, but I just wanted to kind of flag that as a potential for confusion, is that people using the same terms, the same practices, actually talking about different threads. So are you talking about deconstruction after deconstruction after deconstruction, or are you talking about I am this one thing, right? I am this one thing, awareness or the absolute or whatever. Very different trajectories.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I've been talking about that too. And through your model, it became very clear that you're changing threads the moment it becomes a field, and that it's exactly what happened to me. So there was just out of the blue this presence of boundless field, descending into the body, and there was no inside, outside, upside down. And all objects, including the body, were just part of the field. They were the field. And so it was crystal clear that separation is an illusion. So by taking away everything like neti neti, it disclosed, instead of the emptiness of phenomena, the oneness of it all. And that's where the path continued for 12 years, I would say. And it was like this field was looking through my eyes at everyone else who was also the field, and this feeling of like, that what I am was never born and cannot die. So this is clearly oneness, and how you can start with the same practice and then flip on another, switch to another thread. So great. Yeah. Thanks for bringing it up. Happened here.
Mhm.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so if you're, I mean, you will discover some field or some kind of, container, some kind of awareness or something like that along the way. And the question is, are you then turning towards that and dissolving it with the question, with the guiding question of the emptiness thread, which is this thing that appears to be real, is it really so? Or are you using the guiding question of the oneness thread, which is what is not part of this field yet, and and is it actually separate? So there you're trying to actually add more to the field, right? So very, very different directions.
I can second that. I experience it myself, and I see, just like you said, everywhere in the spiritual communities, that because they don't have the map, so they don't know what's going on. But if you have your map, the Multidharma map, and you can clearly see they use deconstruction and emptiness as a tool for the goal of oneness.
Yeah.
So that's so obvious. So they do deconstruct their personality. I'm not this body. I'm not my thoughts. I'm not the feelings, blah, 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 the whole story, to then end up in I am awareness, I am what I am, and all these kind of things. And then they just forget the tool. Like they forget the deconstructing tool and they remain there. And this is true. And then you can't even argue with them anymore. It's like, this is so true for them that there's no way to even argue about it. And I ended up, it's the same like what Sabina said. It's funny because the Oneness Thread, I just realized today preparing for this talk here, that has been the most stable one in my life, actually. For 3 or 4 years, not 20 or 12, but for 3 or 4 years, I've been sitting in that field. And I could feel like now looking backwards that it was nourished by all what you just said, Advaita teachers and things I heard, because everyone told me, yes, your awareness, yes, your I am. And I'm like, yes, of course. So I could really feel like this was a closed ecosystem of oneness.
Yeah.
Mirroring everywhere, wherever I looked, it was mirrored back at me. And it was only through a psyche thread experience that made the field crash and fall away.
Yeah. So I want to make sure people understand that we're not like being
bashing on that. No.
Yeah, we're not being critical of the oneness thread, because the oneness thread is like totally valid, completely beneficial, pathway of spirituality. Just being clear that there's like where the differences are between the threads. And I think you pointed to something, Yvonne, that actually when it comes to pitfalls and challenges and things like that, this is also something that happens is, that people are in a community that is focused on oneness in the way that you were describing. All of the teachings and all of the language of the community is reinforcing, I am this field, I am this, whether it's awareness or the one or the I am God or whatever the words are that the community has, emphasizing this oneness thread, and you may be deepening into those experiences and finding that to be very helpful framing. But there may come a time where you have some other thread that arises, and in your case, you said psyche thread. It could be emptiness thread. Often it's emptiness thread. Suddenly, the whole field collapses. Suddenly, the whole notion of God turns out to be just a concept. Suddenly, the whole thing falls away, and you're within this community that is really prioritizing oneness, right? You might be told, and you might have the idea that your awakening is broken, you're wrong, you're backsliding, you're deluded, you're having a misunderstanding, whatever kind of negative ideas and self-talk might arise. When actually what's happening is you're just kind of shifting gears into another thread, right? It's this braiding process that we're going to talk about is now starting. So Sabina, it sounded like you had a kind of a collapse experience like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Before it collapsed, there was first a crescendo, I would say. I I would call it grace in a way. My mother got very sick, and there was just no way of, separating from or escaping from the pain, being completely naked in this human experience. And then there was just not two beings, just one, and an impersonal, unfathomable love that was so big, actually, and so intense that I thought it would break the body.
Mhm.
And then shortly after that, just one moment, out of the blue, my shifts were always out of the blue, not by practicing something particular. The field collapsed. It was gone completely, never came back. And then just in looking back, that there was still a subtle, I would say, eternal witness or self with a capital S or whatever.
Mhm.
Without me noticing, of course. So you can stabilize in there and think like, this is the end of the road. Yeah, because it feels like all encompassing. And but there was still some remnants of something not quite locatable that was separate from, or had a hierarchy in it or whatever. And then when that was gone, the whole field was gone. Yeah.
Yeah, this is good. So we're getting, kind of deeper and deeper down the thread towards getting towards the bottom with this conversation. And yeah, I think your experience, I maybe had different language, but I think it was pretty similar, and I think most people's is pretty similar, where it's like on the oneness thread, it's like, oh, I am awareness, let's say, and then awareness collapses, and it's like, oh no, everything is actually just, um, one field of experience, let's say, and then that collapses, and it's like, oh no, there's just presence, and then that collapses, and it's like, oh no, everything there's just this, right? There's no words that can describe it. It's just this, and then that collapses, right? So that you're constantly, in my case anyway, constantly trying to put a label on like what this oneness is, what this allness is, what this everythingness is, and the labels get subtler and subtler and subtler as you progress down this trajectory. Each time you think, oh, before I thought I had the clear picture, but now I see what's really underneath that, and there's this deeper level of unity, right? And it's a more subtle level of unity, and it just gets kind of progressively more subtle, progressively deeper as you move down towards the bottom of the thread. Um, I don't know. Any comments, or should we get into the bottom? um,
Well,
so
what I can say is before my bottom started, I already had braiding and integration happening, because then there was a lot of switching
yeah,
back and forth between the threads.
I think that's right. I think that's we talk about it kind of artificially, like we talk about the whole thread, and then we talk about integration or braiding, and then we talk about integration. But actually, you know, I mean, that's the beauty of the Multidharma model, is that we aren't talking about like discrete stages, like first this happens, then this happens, then this happens. It's kind of just like, there's an opening process, there's a deepening process, there's a braiding process, there's a integration process. They can happen, there's a release process, and they can happen kind of overlapping with one another. And my experience was definitely that the depths of the bottom of the threads was not reached until they were pretty well integrated, like after a lot of braiding. So you guys are both nodding.
Yes,
Your experience was similar.
same experience. Yeah.
Um, so I guess, I mean, before we jump into braiding, I guess we should just kind of um, specify like the very bottom of the thread after this process of getting subtler and deeper, subtler and deeper and subtler and deeper. Let me say it how I would say it, and then you guys can say, what you would say differently. But to me, it's like, um, the bottom of the thread is when you see that every last aspect of reality, like absolutely every perception, absolutely every experience, every shred of everything that could possibly exist, has been seen as being part of an underlying unity of some kind. People will word this differently, but like ground of being is a good term that people will often use. There's some kind of ground, some kind of source or origin that's underlying absolutely everything, and it's all coming from this um, absolute, or this ground, or this source. Um, Different people will word that differently, but there's then, I think, once you've arrived at that place, some version of the question, but who's looking at that? Like, who's seeing the ground of being? So who's witnessing the ground of being? Um, it's going to be a very subtle version of a who. It's not going to be a sort of like you know, a gross kind of like witness consciousness or awareness or something like that. But the ground of being, it seems to be there, seems to be present. And then the question will arise of like, well, present to whom, or if it exists, if it's there in experience, then like who's experiencing it, or some kind of very subtle shred of subject will be found to be kind of um, lurking underneath in the background. And this last kind of little shred of subjectivity will also collapse, and there really will be absolutely nothing separated from the field. At this point, it doesn't even make sense to call it a field, because there's no boundaries whatsoever. Every last thing has been dissolved into this ground, into this absolute. There's absolutely nothing separate from the absolute, and nothing that could separate itself out to see the absolute. So it's like the whole notion of oneness collapses, because how could there be a boundary around this oneness? How could there be anything separate from oneness? It may no longer make sense to even call it oneness. Just sort of like the whole trajectory kind of reaches its culmination with with the realization of the absurdity of the whole thing. Like, this whole thing could never have possibly been anything other than a dream of separation, or an imagination that there was separation. It couldn't possibly have been ever. The separability is just completely impossible. Okay, so I just put some words around it. Of course, obviously, these kinds of experiences are ridiculous to try to talk about with words. So the words are just kind of pointing in that direction. But I don't know. What do you guys think about words, and what would you say at this point?
I think what I can say is that I'm not sure if you mentioned it in the other threads, is that often at the bottom of a thread, it can become very dramatic again. Like you thought you're deep down, you had experiences and you're done with it. But then the last bit is like, boom, really like an explosion of all the energy, or all the, the quality of the thread. At least that's how it happens for me, because there was this field and it was there for a long time and it was all obvious and clear. But the end of the Oneness Thread for me was like really a physical experience. It was not so much of an insight. It was purely experienced through the heart. And it was like a dying process. I thought I had a heart attack, actually. And I screamed and I cried, and that did a lot of things. The body did a lot of things. And after that, everything just, I think what you maybe did in earlier stages with Tonglen or with Metta Bhavana happened to me in a very short period of time. Within 2 weeks, the whole universe was flowing through me, like beauty, pain, dark, shadow, light, everything. And there was no through the body. There was no me anymore. There was no way of separating any of what was showing up through the heart space from a me. It was just all one, like a huge washing machine with everything in it for 2 weeks. And I really thought the body wouldn't survive it because it was so much, too much. I thought, this is not bearable for a human being. This is too much of this. And then it flipped completely into emptiness. So this is when emptiness and oneness had like a dance, a very, very, quick dance. And then it was already into integration. And I can't really say anything about the thread itself because then it was already all like integrated in one thing.
Yeah, similar here actually. The last thread, I would say the psyche thread helped bring that up. It was like holding on to a belief like they don't want me. And then when that was, seen through, there was just the universe making love to itself, which was a huge orgasm. I mean, it's incredible. And then came the emptiness thread and tore the whole universe down. So then it was boom, nothing, gone. So I would say that was the end of the thread.
Yeah. Great. So again, very different kinds of, experiential descriptions of what this is like. Yeah, you guys had more kind of maybe a little more dramatic oneness. I by the time I was at the end of the oneness thread, it was more subtle. But yeah, again, different people, different experiences. But we've already landed in the conversation about braiding, which is something that we want to talk about. So, you've both mentioned being in this kind of deep state of oneness and then having some other thread kind of come to the foreground and sort of knock the oneness out for a while. This is a process that, those of us who have more than one thread in the process, which I think is most people, are going to experience a kind of a whiplash back and forth between different insights or different perspectives, different identities, different perceptions, different views of reality. Right? Those are the attributes of an awakening experience. Is going to have deep changes in those, and each thread has its own version of those. And so suddenly you might find yourself kind of flip-flopping back and forth between different threads, and can be disorienting. This is, I think, a place where people have a lot of confusion about what they're experiencing. But look, so let me give an example, from my own experience of this. So of this braiding process. So, when you're at the bottom of the oneness thread, it's like, oh, now I see that underlying everything, there is this unity of some kind. There's this source, there's this ground. But at the bottom of the emptiness thread, that source or ground is seen to be a concept, a non-existent illusion. So you go from, if you're braiding between the bottoms of these threads, like you could go for like one day or one moment, you're experiencing this ground that is the ultimate sacred like source of the whole universe. And then the next day or the next moment, you see that itself was just a concept that falls away, leaving nothing. But then the next day or the next moment, you might have the experience of, oh, I found a ground that's even deeper underneath the oneness and the emptiness. I found this deeper ground, which is the ultimate source of both oneness and emptiness. But then the next moment, you're like, no, wait, that too is a concept, and that falls away. And then the next moment you're like, wait, I found the even deeper ground, which is underneath all of that. And it just, you go back and forth thinking, in a classic kind of braiding experience, you go back and forth between the threads, thinking that you have actually found the truth that underlies what you had previously seen. And you're just like, what? Kind of confused, like, how could this be? I'm just going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth between these different kind of perceptions and realities. And if you have a psyche thread in there and you have an energy thread in there, you could also be realizing, oh, wait, no, everything's energy. And then like, oh, wait, no, everything is a projection of my own, unconscious. And you just kind of like, redefining like who I am and what reality is, and just experiencing, these different perspectives, one after the other. If that's happening, I call that braiding. It's a confusion about which one of these are primary, which one is the real experience. Sometimes confusion can be the prevailing emotion, or the prevailing kind of interpretation of braiding. But eventually this is going to start to blend together. We'll get to that in a minute, but let's talk about sort of confusion and braiding for a minute. What do you guys what was your experience with that, or what do you want to add to what I just said?
Well, I can add that, for example, since oneness has been such a predominant thread for a very long time, when the emptiness thread came up and started braiding, emptiness killed God. Definitely, God. And then, but what I also noticed, I don't think I experienced that much like making ontologies or new identities, but more like seeing how the different threads kind of helped each other. For example, when there was a huge oneness experience, that would bring up stuff from the psyche, for example. And then, or like when shadow would come up, the oneness or the loving kindness came and made it easier to stay with that, for example. So they kind of like more helped with each other. But every time the emptiness thread came up, it was the big party pooper, It killed energy, it killed God, it was just snipping away stuff. So that was very confusing because I didn't know what was going on, And then I started to push and pull, trying to, I could like control any of that or whatever. And that made it very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree on what you just said about the oneness and the psyche thread. The same here. They would really nourish each other. And what I just realized by listening to what you just shared, Pierce, I think I had just an insight, is like the oneness thread for me was the real truth. And I think it is because it felt like home. It's so like, as humans, we want to feel cozy and loved and embraced and all these kind of things. And you get it when you're in oneness, right? That's the longing. That's a deep human longing, not even spiritual. It's like a human longing we all have. The oneness was the real home. And also when I hear people say, like, I lost my awakening. Usually when you listen, they lost the oneness thread. They don't say this when they lose psyche thread or even emptiness, because it can be a very dry place to be in emptiness. You're maybe lucky when you're out of it. But with oneness is most of the times that you hear people say, I lost my awakening, I want it back, it's all gone. So that was just something that came up for me, is that, yeah, oneness really has this very familiar, homey quality that usually people also equal with awakening.
Yeah, great.
Actually, it's a beautiful way to awaken. I mean, it's something I would wish for people to awaken on the oneness thread, because, it can be healing and nourishing and everything, And so, same here. It felt like home.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, for me, I think I'm realizing I was more maybe whiplashed than you two. Between the different threads, like a little maybe it was a little more related to how I was trying to make sense of things and play and kind of place, make ontologies or philosophies out of this and kind of try to understand reality. So sounds like it sounds like you two maybe had a more um I don't know. I, again, it's just kind of differences between people and what our minds make of the process that's happening, right? So, um, but I agree with the oneness threads, kind of warmth and real traction that has, and actually, I mean, that's maybe a good segue into talking about integration, because what we were just talking about is like the braiding between the emptiness and oneness, and the confusion over which one of these is primary because each one seems to like cut, the emptiness thread seems to cut the ground out from under the oneness thread, but then the oneness thread seems to have an even deeper unity, right? That it keeps incorporating emptiness into it. So these two are sort of like a polarity or something that is like if you're braiding these two back and forth and back and forth, they are, um, seen as being opposite, seen as being different than one another. For me, the process of braiding went from, seeing these two polarities as like irreconcilable, like they're like you know, I can't possibly understand you know, how both of these could be true, to a sense of like paradoxicality, like somehow even though it's impossible, they are both true. And you can kind of like see it like this or see it like that. It's like the dual aspect of reality. Like reality has these two aspects to it. It's both empty and um, one, but I kind of have to pivot my viewpoint in order to see it like this or see it like that, right? I can like change my point of view and see it one way or another. Two sides of the same coin, but I have to turn the coin in order to see them. And then for me, it went from that into a further integration where it was just like, oh, of course, it's both simultaneously. Like reality is both empty and full at the same time. It's both, emptiness and form at the same time. It's both samsara and nirvana at the same time. These are my kind of Buddhist ways of saying that. But the mind at this point is like not the right tool for the job. But the mind is too dualistic in order to make sense of this. And so this, I'm talking about like a lived kind of sense or a felt sense rather than something that can be conceptually grasped, because the mind just can't make sense of it. But experientially, you just feel like, oh yeah, everything is both. Both are true somehow at the same time. Um, so yeah, so braiding with the emptiness and oneness kind of reconciles the difference between them. But then braiding with the other threads reconciles eventually the difference between them. They kind of like start blending together, coming together in, I think, individualistic and unique ways that are different from person to person. So I'll just mention, and I'll turn it over to you guys. I'll just mention real quick the way that one of the integrations happened for me with the energy thread is that this field of oneness was a field of love, a field of sacred compassion. But it became very clear once it started um, integrating with the energy thread, which is a whole separate awakening that was happening, on a different channel, you could say. These two started blending together, and suddenly it's like, oh, this field of love, this field of divinity, this field of sacredness is an energetic field. It is an energy it's the energy, like the unity has an energetic quality, and the quality of the energy of the universe is love, right? So it was like the emptiness, the energy thread and the oneness thread blending. And for me, in terms of the psyche thread, I always had a lot of feminine archetypes, a lot of feminine, visions and tactile experiences and other aspects happening in the psyche thread. There's a lot of feminine imagery, and so for me, it was very natural that when this started integrating together, that for me it was like, oh, this field of love, this ground of being, it's an energetic quality. It was also a feminine quality. So there was this sort of like, for me, it was very much like a goddess, like the goddess made the most sense in terms of the vocabulary to use to refer to this oneness. It was like, oh, the universe, the one is the goddess, and she is completely sacred love, energy of sacred love, and completely non-existent because the emptiness thread started blending in there too. Okay, what about you all? Talk a little bit about your experience of threads integrating together and how this played out for you.
Maybe I'll jump in because it's similar. Energy has kind of always been in tandem with the other thread. Like you, from the very beginning almost, and love was also energetic. They were not separable. It was an energy. In that whatever was going on the threads always had an energetic component, maybe because I'm an energy healer, but they were not separable in a way. So maybe they were fused or very, riding in tandem or whatever. And then when deep in the integration, there was this, I could not, like you, switch perspectives and see it like this or that. Maybe it was not in the system to do that, or there was no impulse to do that. But there was this feeling of like emptied out experience, but that had a very subtle scent of holiness, of beauty. There was physically beautiful in the body, and it was also energetic. There was a lot of vitality and liveliness going on while that was happening. And so that's what I noticed when the integration was very, very deep in the process, that the experiences were not, it was like full on blown, like ecstasy of love or whatever. It was just a scent, but that everything was kind of like was intermingling in a way, but you couldn't quite, or I couldn't quite grab it anymore. It was a mixture in a way, very specific.
Yeah, that does sound a lot. I think we have some similarities there. So Yvonne, we're counting on you to bring in something totally different.
Well, first I have to join in regarding energy and oneness. Definitely, compassion and love is an energetic quality. For me, because the psyche thread was so strong and shadow work was so strong, it was the braiding or the integration was to see that shadow has never been separate. Because usually shadow is the thing that's separate. That's the thing you don't want to see. So the whole shadow material was encompassed in oneness. And it was obvious that all of what happened in the psyche has never been separate of anything, even if it felt like this for a very long time. And with emptiness, I shared it already in the emptiness talk. For me, the Heart Sutra was the key. So, but not in an intellectual way, but listening to the Heart Sutra just shifted something, and it was so obvious that form and formlessness are the same. How could it not be? And generally speaking about integration, here is that I already was in a state of full, complete surrender. The mind wasn't active anymore when integration happened. So I didn't even try to figure out or to control or to understand any of this. It was more like a leaf in the wind. And I was just, going with the movement and not really thinking about it, or there was no resistance. There was no, why is it like this? And why can't it? That wasn't happening anymore. And I wouldn't even question, is this emptiness or fullness? It was just like, yeah, the full surrender to the whole, whatever wanted to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. I mean, surrender can be a key term on all of the threads, I think, but definitely in the traditions of oneness, right? In like Islamic and Christian mysticism and things like that. Like the word surrender has a lot of resonance, and it's a kind of a frequently used term. I think that's right. Like just surrendering everything, every last thing into the field, into God, into the goddess in my case, is kind of a key way of talking about this. So I think that also maybe raises a point that, what we haven't talked about yet is the integration, the braiding and the integration with daily life. I think Yvonne, you've kind of, maybe opened the door for some of that with talking about, how this was, um, you know, affecting your, traumas and your kind of your biographical, your personal history. Sabina, you talked a little bit about how this kind of incorporated with your job as an energy healer. But maybe we can kind of like highlight that a little more. So for me, one thing that I already mentioned it, but I'll just say it again and kind of draw it out a little bit, which is, when I had this thread open in my early 20s, and so it really kind of defined my whole life. I had that awakening experience at a time before I, had a job and had a family, and sort of like, um, I would say that those experiences, the experience of the opening of the oneness thread, it actually happened in a Buddhist monastery that I had gone to because I thought I wanted to kind of like dedicate my life to emptiness thread practices, right? So I mean, I didn't know that at the time, but this is how I'm saying it in retrospect, is I had gone to the monastery because I really wanted to kind of steep in emptiness practices and focus on emptiness. And I had developed a belief that that was the right thing for me. Had this massive, oneness thread opening, and was like, oh, wait a minute. I don't want to be here in the monastery. No, I need to be in the world. I need to, um, have my job and my life be an expression of my metta, and so I needed to come back out into the world and really sort of find my way. I would say that kind of uh, oriented my whole professional career, my whole life trajectory, in a direction of oneness. And so for me, this oneness thread was very highly integrated, I would say, from that point onwards, in terms of how it matched up with my daily life, because I kind of built my daily life around the principles of the oneness thread, or the insights of the oneness thread. Um, Sabina, like as a healer, that probably has a certain amount of compatibility with the oneness thread too. It wasn't like you were like I don't know, a weapons dealer, or like a, like nuclear arms developer or something, something that was like radically opposed to the oneness thread. So maybe it was an easier kind of integration for you too. Is that right?
Yeah, same. All of what you mentioned. Um, the oneness thread shifted my whole life, and I was working. I had a completely different job, but once the heart opened, it was totally clear that this has to be shared. This is the way. This is the path. So because of that, I became a healer, and because of my work was never separable from my life. It is my life. So it infused everything. It informed everything, and it changed everything. It put life, back from its head to its feet, and yeah, so it was highly integrated with daily life from the beginning, very effortlessly, I would say.
For me, it came simultaneously with integrating the trauma, because the trauma was the thing that kept life and the world and others away to feel safe. And the moment that wasn't necessary anymore because the system was regulated, again, it was very natural. Like, it wasn't, I don't make a big deal about it, but I could feel like there was just this friendly attitude towards everything, like just a natural kindness. That's the easiest thing I can say. And that was just in everything I do, like in meeting people, in petting my cat, and watering my plants. It's just everywhere. There's just this kindness, and I really can see that it's been like, yeah, covered up, and I was more like in how do you say, a person that's not very external, but more like I did my own
Introvert.
things, and in so I became more open to others, and yeah, be more social, and but in a very subtle way. It wasn't like now I'm the superhero doing like, compassion thing, but more in the subtleties, I think, of my relationships to everything, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, great. So none of us were the types that were kind of like um blown away by the opening of the Oneness Thread and suddenly had to like change our careers and our whole sort of life. But I've definitely heard of people who maybe had corporate jobs, or they had some job that was less kind of heart centered and a little more oriented towards money making or something like that, and suddenly they realize like, oh no, this is completely incompatible with my new insights, my new realizations from the Oneness Thread, and they have to sort of change their life, or they had to change their relationships. They had to, cut off friends, or make new ones, or all sorts of stuff can happen in terms of like the impact of this thread on daily life. And I guess like as far as integration goes, so that would be an example of braiding, where it's like, oh, my spirituality is not compatible with my daily life, and there's sort of like a back and forth, and the two don't fit together really well. But moving forward, there would be, kind of a inescapable, undeniable trajectory towards integrating more this thread with daily life. Whether that's making changes, dramatic changes, or even just at the subtle level. Just how do you show up at work? Like, how do you inhabit the space? How do you talk to other people? Like you were saying, Yvonne, how do you just, in your words or in your actions, um, watering your plants, like even the way that you hold the watering can in your hand somehow has love in it, right? It's just like every last action, every last word gets sort of like um, immersed or colored or filtered, through this thread. And so that can be very individual, very different from person to person, how that plays out. But it's part of this integration process that we're talking about. Yeah. So, anything else we need to mention before we start talking about releasing the thread, just in terms of the deepening or the braiding or the integration? Or you guys ready to release the thread? Yeah. Okay. You're both nodding. So, okay. So thread released. So, as usual, I think it's really important to underline that releasing is not rejecting. Releasing is what happens naturally when the thread has been so fully integrated that it's become second nature. It's become kind of baked into the system. You've become so conditioned in the ways of seeing and the ways of being of the thread that it just is no longer relevant to think about it as a thing that you need to do or keep in mind. So releasing is not like pushing away the threads. Um, you know, it's just, and you can't really do anything to release, because if you try to release, then you're somehow continuing to relate to the threads, right? If you're trying to release the thread, you're still with the thread, thinking about the thread, trying to orient towards the thread, right? So it's none of that. It's no effort required. But just naturally at some point, if this thread has been fully absorbed, so in my case, 25 years of sort of just steeping in the perspectives of the oneness thread, eventually it's just the way things are. And you know, you get to the bottom of the thread, and there's really kind of like, how could anything be separate? How is it possible that anything could be held out as being separate? Um, if you come to the point where you fully, fully, fully have digested that insight, that realization, then you no longer need to carry around the thought that, oh, everything's one, because how could it be any different? How could it not be one? So so there's no need to remind yourself of the oneness of things constantly. There's no need to think about oneness or orient towards oneness, because it's just the way things are. And so oneness can be let go of. It could be forgotten about. Just in the same way that a baby, discovering its belly button is super fascinated by that. By the time you're 50 years old, 60 years old, do any of us notice we have a belly button anymore? Like, I mean, maybe if some lint gets stuck in there, but on a daily basis, no, there's no need to remember that we have belly buttons. So something like that is what's happening, I think, when I talk about the process of release. That's what I'm talking about. It's just the thing has become so second nature. It's fully conditioned you. You have been completely reconditioned by this thread to behave and act and see things through this thread, and it just ceases to be something that needs to be held out for analysis or even really noticed anymore. Uh, So that's how I would characterize releasing. I know this, you know, words are hard to um, put on any of these types of experiences. So this is just kind of pointing towards something that happens, and not really 100% accurately capturing it. But yeah, the notion that at some point these ways of seeing, ways of being, just kind of fall away as things that you need to think about and pay attention to. They become automated. They become sort of just second nature. What do you two um, have to add or want to share about the release process?
I just um after this, because the bottom of the thread was so strong, like all this heart kind of like thing, the universe flowing through the heart, and it was so overwhelming, and but also super like intense and beautiful. I remember that even weeks and months later, I tried to recreate the experience of oneness because it was so beautiful. And and then I noticed that it was me trying to recreate oneness. And that's when it dropped. Because I could see clearly I'm just trying to create something that's already here. And it was completely useless to do that. And so the mechanism of trying to recreate experience of oneness just fell away.
Well, yeah, with me it was the emptiness thread took care of that because it kind of like started the releasing uh, of the threads in the sum. And but I noticed that at first there was a phase where there was no love or this sensing organ that has always been like the compass or the empathetic, interaction. It was just not there. So it felt odd because, like you, Pierce, it has been like the main practice for decades. And then until that was also seen as a holding on to something, in this case, emptiness. And then it was just like there was no need to focus on love or an open heart or compassion or whatever. It would just suddenly flow or not, depending on the situation. And it was more like raw data in the body, just body sensations. But they didn't need a name anymore. They didn't need the label, this is compassion, this is love. They didn't have a special meaning anymore. There was no agenda attached to it. The heart would open when it opened or not. And there was nothing more to it. And by all of this falling away, I would say it's natural and it's even more intense in a way. But not that anyone could do this or have any idea about what this means.
We talk about releasing the threads in other videos, so we don't need to go into it in super in-depth today. But the important point here is just the kind of the realization that the oneness thread does not need to be held on to. We don't need to hold these concepts and hold these ways of seeing so tightly. We don't need to continue to generate them and think about them and kind of obsess over them and do all these practices and so on and so forth, because it's just already there. It's already baked into the system. It's already naturally happening. It is already, how could there be any separation? So then why do we need to pay attention to oneness? And eventually it sort of becomes, it's interesting to talk about, and we can point other people through the process of the thread, but in terms of like our own experience and our own practice, I would say for me, all of these threads having been released, it doesn't mean that they're gone. It means that things can just naturally be as they are. And sometimes things have a certain quality of love or compassion, or if I feel a vibration, or I feel things are empty or what have you, but there isn't really the need to track all of that and think about it and even really pay attention to it. It can just arise and be as it is in the moment, and it's perfectly fine. So any final comments on kind of what it's like to be living with a released thread, or anything else, if you want to add anything before we close up?
I just want to add that what you just shared about your release is similar to mine, actually. It was not just that I realized I created oneness. I realized also I created emptiness. I just created everything, basically. So it's kind of interesting to see how something that's so obvious was unseen for so long. So then when that was seen through, that it was all my creation, which I would also say is a psyche thread release, then I ended up in despair, actually, because then I couldn't find, like you said, it was so baked into the autopilot that I couldn't find the experiences. I couldn't separate them out and say, this is oneness, this is emptiness, this is energy. And there was a long period of mourning, of loss, until, you just said that. You just relax into it and like, it's here, it's not here. I can't, who knows?
Yeah, that's a good point to point out, to underscore just like the emotional reactions or the thoughts that people can have about the release. And for me, it was like a relief. It was like, oh, I've been, applying these filters and producing reality in a certain way. And I can let go of that. I don't have to do it. And there was just like a little moment of relief. And then it was like, okay, move on. But for you, there was more kind of a mourning process, having lost, something that felt lovely. That's a little different than my experience. Yeah. What about you, Sabina?
Yeah, I had the mourning too, especially since the emptiness thread took care of it all.
Okay.
It was just, it was dry for quite a while, very dry. And but now there's it's more of a naturalness. And I think I shared it in the last thread we talked about. Now, all these holding on to whatever, and even the threads, they feel a little artificial now because they're just not needed anymore. It was kind of like perspectives you take, which is useful, can be useful to navigate. But now they almost feel like a little artificial in a way.
Yeah.
And it's much more natural now. You call it the autopilot. I call it natural.
Yeah. And then you said artificial, and I like to say superfluous. Like it's not necessary to add this on top of what's naturally already happening. So yeah, naturalness is a nice term. And yeah. Great. So we've just kind of touched on release here, and we talk in more depth in other videos. So we'll have a series of deep dives like this where we talk about each thread in isolation. Then we have other videos where we talk about the process of integration and braiding and release. And there's lots of material on all kinds of different topics and conversations with you two and with other people on multidharma.net and on the YouTube channel. And for the two of you all have created a German branch of Multidharma, I guess, multidharma.de, and you're doing retreats and teachings in German, but also soon in English as well. I love talking with you two, and we'll do many more of these together, I hope. And great seeing you. Thanks for being here. And thank you to everybody for watching, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye. See you soon.